In 1936, the world was about to launch itself in a new era of war and chaos once more. Countries were on the brink of collapse with revolutions and civil wars looming, waiting to be unleashed at the right time. The German Empire stood strong for many years, but was now exhausted, much like their leader. The result of these nations today stirred from the Weltkrieg, fought from 1914 to 1919, with an official peace signed in 1921. The war was waged between the Entente and the Central Powers, as more than 70 million men took part. 10 million died as a result of the Weltkrieg, making it the deadliest conflict in history. Though the word Weltkrieg translated itself into World War, the nation that stood absent was America, whose only involvement was forced when in 1917 an American freighter carrying clothes, food, and toys donated by German-American families for German children for Christmas was torpedoed by a British freighter that mistook it for a German ship. The Americans were outraged, partially stoked by German spies. By that time, the war was already angling towards a loss for the Entente. Though the British had managed some successes over the Ottoman Empire, as they successfully took Baghdad and Jerusalem, their ally France lay crippled as the heavy casualty count resulted in a strike by the French soldiers, discouraging French high command to continue great offensives until the end of that year and giving the Germans a chance to strengthen their grip. That year, Russia, which was fighting in the east but not making good progress, also left the war as the country collapsed into anarchy with the Tsar abdicating in March. A provisional government was formed under Alexander Kerensky, but was overthrown in November by the Bolsheviks, starting the Russian Civil War that lasted until 1920 with a loss for the Bolsheviks, partially due to the assassination of Lenin. Britain was humiliated by the defeat against the Germans, but did not stop there. The year of 1925 would go down in infamy for the Brits, as a British general strike over coal tariffs escalated into a nationwide uprising when government troops slaughtered the striking miners. When the army began to stand down or defect and the Royal Navy began mutiny, the government decided to flee to Canada. A coalition of leftists centered on the Trades Union Congress took control under John Maclean and created the Union of Britain. The collapse of the British government led to massive shifts and land grabs among its overseas possessions. For one, India was broken up into 3 new states, with the Dominion of India still under influence by the Crown in the northwest of the former country. As expected, the poor showing by the British also resulted in provoking moves for independence, like Somalia, where Sultan Mohammed proclaimed his country's independence after portraying Britain as a protectorate facade. In Canada, the country that the British government fled to, the Senate was replaced by a reconstituted House of Lords. King George V was since that day forth seated in the Dominion of Canada. King George hoped to one day reclaim the home islands with the help from the support of the Conservatives. However, R.B. Bennett's Conservatives lost the 1935 election to Mackenzie King's Liberals, who, with a loose coalition of progressives, now held a slim majority in Parliament and sought to assert Canadian parliamentary sovereignty against the growing power of the British exiles and the Crown. This meant that the Crown had potential threats awaiting overseas, but also within their own country borders. By 1936, the Entente consisted of the Dominion of Canada, the West Indies Federation, the French Republic, the Dominion of India, the Australasian Confederation, and Sardinia. As the global economy was declining, more efficient ways of construction and resource gathering needed to be adjusted. King George knew that Canada was not ready yet to put up a fight with the Union of Britain. In fact, he thought it likely that this war would occur beyond his time. But he was a strong believer in research and set forth a path for governmental support to researchers starting with electronic mechanical engineering. Canada's war machine was weak compared to other countries, much to the fact that King George abstained from military development, fearing this might hurt the crown's image even more after losing the Krieg against Germany and even losing their own country. Nevertheless, it was time to put some effort into preparing Canada of what was about to come. By 1936, the king's health was deteriorating fast. The doctors who examined him did not see a positive long-term outcome. They estimated he had around 30 days or so more to live. The physicians kept this information from the king. Civilian factories were established over the entire country, but for the moment, Canada lacked a sufficient amount of resources. The three most important alliances globally were the earlier mentioned Entente, the Reichspakt under the lead of Germany, and consisted of multiple countries in Europe, Africa, and Asia, and the Syndicaliste Internationale, otherwise known as the Third National, with the Commune of France and the Socialist Republic of Italy as its founding members. Syndicalism was a political ideology that aimed to overthrow capitalism by coordinated actions conducted by industrial workers. The basic political unit of syndicalism was a federation of collectivized trade units, known as the syndicate. It advocates interest aggregation of multiple non-competitive categorized units to negotiate and manage an economy. It holds, on an ethical basis, that all participants in an organized trade internally share equal ownership of its production. Besides the Italians and French, the syndicalists that took control of Britain during the Revolution also joined their faction. Kaiser Wilhelm II was an old man who used to be an image of pride and resilience, but now was losing face as the economy withered away and turmoil was mustering its strength underneath a watchful eye of the public. To still keep his own political efforts strengthened, he tried a move of imperial restructuring. The leader of the Union of Britain, Philip Snowden, was making the first preparations of the 1936 Congress of the Trade Unions. Future plans and the path that Britain would delve into would be determined there. The Commune of France, formerly known as the French Republic, was founded after France had endured a revolution and civil war sparked by the CGT, the General Confederation of Labor. Sébastien Faure told its people that it was headed in the direction of economy, something hopeful for the people as the global economy was falling. It was supposed to create the illusion that France would do things differently. 1936 was immediately thrown into shadow as President Kerensky of Russia had been shot and killed while on the way to the Senate. The assailant was taken down by the police, but the goals and intentions of the attacker were unknown. Despite his massive unpopularity among the Russian people due to botched land reform and ineffective rule, Kerensky was nevertheless able to hold the country together for years, and his death had thrown Russia into chaos. The senators were already discussing a possible replacement to Kerensky. New coalitions were being formed, both between the left and the right, while military men like Denikin, Wrangel, and Korniklov were just one step away from intervening to dissolve democracy and save Mother Russia. Back in 1916, the Act of November 5th resulted in Polish lands occupied by the German Empire being granted autonomy from the collapsing Russian Empire. This came at a price, as the Germans made a concerted effort to colonize a portion of their land known as the Polish Frontier Strip. In 1936, Poland was a kingdom without a king. The so-called Eternal Regency continued with no clear end in sight, and having both Germany and Austria being involved as they had an opportunity to strengthen the ties through Polish royal house with their influence. The Netherlands, that lay next to Germany under lead of Queen Wilhelmina, was dependent on the German economy, and with its decline, the worries of the Dutch officials rose. The Dutch government set forth a navy plan labeled Vlootplan Helvig that would be the stepping stone towards protecting merchant convoys to increase the Dutch economy by trade with other nations beside those in Europe. Brazil, that had a strong economic relationship with the US during the Weltkrieg, which worsened during 1925, was able to recover its economy slowly since 1927 after revolts and clashes occurred in cities like Sao Paulo. With a focus on urban economy rather than agriculture, Artur da Silva Bernandes set forth the notion of radio broadcasts across the entire nation as a show of progress and unity. The Dominion of India currently headed towards a way of civilian industry. Even though broken up, an increasing research would hopefully quickly establish this part of former India as the industrial dominant one. And then, on the 18th of January 1936, news went public that King George V had passed away. Ever since the Radical Union's victory in Britain, King George had been plagued by illness and his health had been falling. The public was taken by surprise when they heard that the king had died from a bout of fever. Now his son, Prince Edward, was set to inherit the crown. The prince would be known as King Edward VIII and had a huge task hanging on his shoulders. Edward knew that there were those now looking towards him to fulfill his father's wishes of retaking Britain back for the crown. Though this was not made public yet, Edward assured his most inner circle that he would fulfill his father's dying wish for the pride of what once was their Britain. But it would take time and preparation. Though Edward had been groomed to be king, he was not yet ready to take on such a task. He would need to surround himself with strategists and advisors, and allies needed to be gathered. And then, in due time, the Union of Britain would burn.